Hello and welcome to episode 7 of Tool Time with Professor Levy. Today we are going to extend the radius jig that we made for the router a couple of weeks ago to be able to cut arcs that have a diameter that is much larger. We're going to be cutting a few radii today that are 35 feet, so we need to extend the router jig for that. The way we're going to do that, you'll see, is with a whole bunch of plywood. When a router jig gets that long, or any jig gets that long for that matter, it becomes really unstable. So we're going to reinforce the jig with some framing members that are on edge, and that will help stiffen the jig so it doesn't affect our measurement while we are scribing these radii. Then we're going to start building these platforms. We're going to scribe one with the straight cut mortising bit and cut that one perfect, and then we're going to use a flush trim router bit to cut the other 31 lids that we need to make, and then we'll start framing them up. Okay, here we have the start of our extremely large radius jig for the router. You can see it goes out the door. The one problem that we have discovered with the jig so far is that because of the extreme length, and this is no surprise, it is twisty a little bit when we try to sweep an arc with it. So what we're going to do to overcome this is attach 2 wheels to the middle of it to kind of help pick it up. You can see down the end here is where the router is going to attach, just like it did in our jig from beforehand. So we're going to come back to the middle, and stiffen the jig up by placing 2 wheels right about here in the jig. Okay, here you can see that we have reinforced the router jig down its length with 2x4 and stiffened it up. Here on the sheet of plywood, I already have the first of the radii drawn from one of the corners. The next step is we're going to pull the last radius across and find our center point. Okay, so we're just going to draw this last radius. And that's our center point right there. What we're going to do now is come back to the opposite side of the jig that we made, and in here I already have our other radius center point drawn. So we're going to pull the screw out and change the radius. So now we have just secured the second pivot point down. We've left a little bit of breathing room underneath the jig and not sunk the screw completely, so it still pivots. The next thing that we're going to do is move the wheels so that they can roll along the table in the middle and help support us, and then we're going to cut our second radius. Okay, so now we are set up to do our next radius. I'm going to drop the router. It's not quite open enough. There we go. So I'm gonna go a little bit less this time, and we'll make a pass, and then I will double check that measurement. Not that I really care, I'm just curious. So I'm gonna get on the other side of this thing. Okay, so now we're gonna turn the router on. So I think we're going to be 1.5 inches short of our measurement, which is fine, because I just saw the line that I drew and we're inside of that. But if you wouldn't mind grabbing the tape measure, I'm going to reset the router bit a bit deeper. And take a pass going the other direction. Just waiting for the router to stop. Now I'm just going to check. So I think if I'm right, we're going to be in the neighborhood of 5'10.5". 5'11". So we're 1 inch short. That's fine. So the next thing I'm going to do is just repeat the process and drop the router bit down some. It hasn't been tracking. Okay, I'm going to go the other direction. And now we'll set it up for the final pass after I remove this sawdust. All right, let's see if that did what we needed to. Okay, and for the last pass. Screwed. So now we just need to, router has stopped. So remove the screw and we have our template.
Got one over here.
Yes, sir.
There's one over here.
It feels like there's one. Or is it just attached still? Okay, so we just have a little bit of cleanup to do. So yesterday, after looking at the arc that we cut in the computer, I just wanted to double check to make sure that it was going to pan out the same distance as I had drawn in the computer, since we lost the inch that I had committed to with the router. Turned out that that inch affected us greatly, so today we're going to approach this in a different way that I haven't shown you guys yet. So first of all, I'm going to show you the draftings, and then we will go through the process of actually cutting this out. So here I have the same drafting that I had for laying out the platforms before, but I have removed all the angular dimensions and just given the dimensions of where the points on a full sheet of the lid go. So here we have the width of the sheet, which is 3'4" and 9/16. This bottom corner is 2 inches in from the edge of the sheet. The sheet is 6 foot 1 1/4 long. This corner is 2 foot 9 3/8 down from the top corner and 1 inch 5/8 over from it. So with those points marked on the sheet, we can then decide where the curves go. So on this sheet of drafting here, I have marked the full curve with its full scale. So this is 1:1. So this is the actual length and space that these curves are going to take up on the sheet of plywood. We're going to cut these out and actually stick them to the sheet of plywood and then carefully cut them out with the jigsaw. So with some Elmer's glue, we have taken a paintbrush and put a wide swath of glue along here and glued that radius down. And then over here, we've done the same thing with the bottom radius. The next thing I'm going to do is take our straight edge and draw a line between the two edges, and then we're ready to cut. So now we're going to cut the arc with the jigsaw. Okay, so I'm gonna have to cut this one up here on the table because I don't have a long enough wingspan to be able to reach the other side and look at the line properly. So we're gonna start it up here and then I'll probably hop down and so now I'm going to hop down and finish the cut from here. Whenever I'm cutting a long curve like that, I find it a lot easier to have the blade in front of my face so I can follow it better. Because I just changed the blades on those saws, the thing that we're going to do now is confirm that the circ saw guide still works with my circ saw. So what we're doing here is screwing the circular saw guide down to our piece of wood along the line that we know that we want to cut, and then I can go ahead and cut the side of the platform off, and then we have our template to build all the rest of them from. So I am going to go ahead and make this cut. And you can see along this edge that it's perfectly lined up with the circ saw guide. So that's illustrating using the circ saw guide to cut a straight line over a long distance. This kind of cut we could make by hand, but is much easier to do with a guide. Cool. Okay, so what we have just done is to take the template to a fresh sheet of plywood. I have screwed it to it in a couple of places, and I'm going to take the circular saw and cut the fresh sheet of plywood close to the profile of the template, and then we will use the flush trim router bit to fully match the template. On the template, I have clearly marked where the top is and that it is template. This is to avoid using it as one of our lids that I have marked the template with top, so we know which side is up. This seems like it might be silly, but a lot of times we will wind up in a rush and frame the wrong side of a platform. It's also marked template so that we won't frame this one until the very end. It's important that all of these platforms match the original. So now I'm going to take the circular saw and match the sheet that we're cutting somewhat closely to the template. And the aim of doing this is just to make the router bit have a little bit less material that it has to cut through. I'm going to do the same thing to this end, and then we'll do the same thing down this end. This doesn't have to be anywhere near close. It's just cutting the new sheet down so it's a bit less stressful on the router bit and it wears less. Okay, so I have swapped the router bit in the router, so it's our flush trim bit now. So the next thing I'm going to do is flip this over. And I'm going to spin it. This back edge here is our flush edge, our straight edge. so we don't need to route this edge. We're just concerned about 1, 2, 3 edges. The template is on the bottom because the bearing on the router is on the bottom.
Don't cause a problem?
Yes, they are. Let's just pop them onto the top side. So Mr. Lindsay's just finishing popping the screws onto the top. He noticed that they're gonna interfere with where the router is gonna pass over. The next thing that I need to do is set the depth of this router. So I want the bearings of this router. If I open it fully, I want the bearings and the bit to ride on our template, and therefore the fluted cutting edge of the router is going to cut off the top sheet that we've cut close. I'm going to start on that side and work my way around. Again, we're ignoring the back because it's already flush. So you can see that the router has cut with the flush trim bit, has cut the top sheet that we just placed on it perfectly to the template that we just made. This is why I spent so much time making sure that we got the first one perfect. So now each one of these is going to match the subsequent ones. Now I'm going to attach our template for the rest of the platforms that we're needing to make to a fresh sheet of plywood here. We have built the first half of the ring that we're making, so these ones are the reverse and repeat of the first 16. The first thing I'm going to do is screw this nice and flush to the plywood here. Then I'm going to cut it close again with the circ saw like we did before, and then route it out, and then we'll frame this one up. So I'm gonna get my impact driver and some 1 5/8 screws. This template is great because it means I don't have to measure or mark anything. Just line the two sheets up well with each other. Which takes a minute, but once we have this right, that's perfect. I'm going to screw the sheet to the template from the underneath side. That way, when I route around it with the router, the faceplate of the router won't get caught on the screws coming out of the template. Just 4 screws is enough to hold it in place. Okay, so now I can grab the circular saw, ensuring that my sheet of plywood is actually off the table. And now I can trim the sheet. And then the short side. Now I can spin the sheets and cut this side off. Now that we have the sheet trimmed closer to the template, I can now use my router with the flush trim bit to cut our fresh sheet to the profile that we have on the template here. The reason that I have cut our fresh sheet closer to our template size, but not exactly, is it's nicer on the router, and the router bit, it will wear less and live longer and cut more effectively if it doesn't have a lot of material it's trying to get through. So I'm just cutting it vaguely close, enough so that the router bit isn't surrounded on both sides by material it has to cut. It only has to cut on one side of it. It will just allow me to cut cleaner and cut more with this router bit. So I'm going to get this out of the way, flip this sheet over, and we're going to route it. So now I have the edges that need to get routed. We are flush along the back already, hanging off of the table. And I'm going to start on the left-hand side of the sheet here and move around it this way with the router bit. Okay, so I have flipped this over. I have it labeled. I've gone and gotten the framing nailer, a tape measure, and now I am able to start framing this platform up. So I'm going to get rid of our template. I'm just going to set it over here on the plywood. So now I know that this is the bottom of my platform because I have labeled it the bottom. I'm going to pull the air hose down, connect the framing nailer. All right, framing nailer connected. So now I am going to start framing up this platform. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to grab a nice sharp pencil. The first thing I'm going to do is grab a nice sharp pencil. That way I can scribe on some 2x4s where the platform exists, the lid is, cut them to fit. Then I'm going to glue and screw that to the lid and then fit in the stiles and the toggles. Okay, I have sharpened my pencil. Now I am going to line up where I want my rail to sit. I don't want it to be proud of the platform anywhere. I want it to be flush, or where the radius comes inside here, it can be inset. I'm going to make a mark on the bottom side of that 2x4 there, and I'm going to put a cross on the side I want to cut off. I'm now going to bring the saw back into life and line up the cut. It is going to stick through dust collection if I cut it that way, so I'm going to flip it. Because I've drawn my X on this board, I know which side of this line I want to cut on. So I'm now going to make this cut. So now I have my rail. Okay, so I have the framing member that's going to be my rail. I've grabbed my impact driver and my 1 5/8" screws and some glue. I'm going to lay a bead of glue down along where I want the framing member to sit, like that. We're going to position the framing member so it's flush on the sides and not in the middle at all. I'm now going to put in 4 or 5 screws. I'm going to capture the ends first so it can't move on me. We would ordinarily shoot a platform like this together with nails, but in this case we are doing this show outside, so on the off chance that it rains, I want this platform to be able to withstand the water, and having the glue and the threads of the screws is going to provide extra structural support for the lid of the platform. The rain and the sun and the heat won't allow the lid to warp as much as it might if it was just shot together with staples. I'm now going to repeat that process on the other side with the other rail, lining it up on this side and the other side. It's standing a bit proud. So on this side, I'm going to set it back just a little bit so that it's flush at the center but doesn't overhang on the sides. Again, I'm going to draw my X so I know which side to cut on. I'm going to come over to the chop saw again, and I'm cutting this time on the left-hand side of that line. Again, I'm going to grab my glue. Which I lost. The glue does a large portion of actually holding this scenery together, so I like to put a good amount of glue down, not to where it leaks out, but a good solid glue connection is very important. Then I'm going to grab some screws again, secure the 2 ends first. And that is now our 2 rails put in place. The next thing I'm going to do is grab a fresh stick of 2x4. I'm going to lay it on top of the platform here like so. And I like to sit it on top like this because it doesn't require me balancing it as much as trying to hold it inside and get a measurement where I only have to make 1 cut. So I'm going to mark that end that needs to be cut, and this end needs to be cut. Then we're going to take this to the chop saw and cut it. This time I have to make 2 cuts, 1 on this end You may have noticed that I took a few different passes to get through the piece of 2x4 this time. That's because it was a bit bowed in at the bottom of it, and as I was making the cuts, the wood was relaxing back down on itself, so that is how I avoid getting the blade jammed in the wood, which could throw it for me. Now I'm going to measure and mark my second style, and then we'll install both of them. Okay, this board too is going to take a couple of passes to get through because it's bowing in the middle. Set the offcut aside. Cut the other end. I'm setting the saw back to 0. Even though I'm the only person in the shop right now, I don't want to make the mistake of cutting an angle onto a piece of wood I don't intend to. Okay, I'm now ready to install my stiles. What I don't have here, and I'm going to go get, are 3-inch screws. Actually, I'm not. That's why I got the framing nailer out. I'm going to secure the stiles to the rails with the framing nailer. It'll be quicker. And then I can go in and flip it over and secure the lid to the stiles. I'm going to make sure and get glue up the rails and down the lid and up the other rail. And then I can slide my stile in. Again, flush is important here. So I'm going to shoot this stile in place with 3 nails. And then with my persuasion tool over here, I can knock this end of the board that's not quite where I want it. And that's much better. Again, 3 nails down this end. And then we will repeat the process with the other rail. As I'm chewing through lumber and plywood with this show, it's becoming easier to move around this shop. Where I'm standing up until a few days ago used to be a couple of big pallets of plywood, so with them gone, it's a bit more productive in here. This doesn't look like it's going to fit, but if I pick that end up, it will. Just bang this into place. And secure the stile in place without it running on me. And the same down the other end. So here the bottom's flush, but the top isn't. So I'm going to put a nail in the bottom. And then one at the top here to lock it in place. But I'm going to use my persuader here to grab and turn the 2x4. And now that is our 2 stiles locked in place. We need to add 2 toggles, and then we will be done with this platform. Then we'll flip it over and put screws in the lid. Okay, so Now what I want to do is lay out where my toggles are going to go, and 2 foot centers is fine for that. So I'm going to mark 2 foot and 3/4 inch either side, because that's the width of the framing. Remember, 4 foot and 3/4 inch either side. Then I'm going to grab 2 pieces of offcut. One there, one here. And I'm going to grab my framing square to check if this is square to the frame. This isn't crucial here, but it's a good practice. Okay, I've moved those both to being square to the frame now, so I can mark both sides. I'm going to mark one A, the other B, write the same on the lid, and cut them both. I've now cut both toggles here, and I can go ahead and install them. Okay, again, we want to glue this well. So I'm going to draw where it goes. So now I know where to glue this one. And we're going to do the same thing with this. All the accuracy and attention to detail is accomplished here in the layout of the platform. If you keep an eye on the details here, when the platform is finally put together, everything will be flush and square where it needs to be. Now I can shoot it together. Three in each side. Go around the other side. Keeping my fingers out of the path. Woo. Now that I have the toggles secured into the frame of the platform, it's time to flip it over and screw the lid to the toggles. And also to the studs. Now that this is flipped over, I can just zip around it and sink the screws into the stiles, draw some lines for the toggles, and we're all done with this platform. Okay, toggles, and then we're done. Lauren, since you're here, you can come be my assistant. Can you see how there are some nail holes here? On that side, can you line me up with them? I just want to draw a line from holes to holes. You're on this side, are you?
Yeah.
This side now? Cool. And this one? Which side are you on?
This side.
Cool. Say hey to everybody, Lauren. Okay, so now Lauren took stagecraft with me years ago.
2018.
God, that seems like a long time ago. I'm getting screws that are already on the lid of the platform. So we're just going to put one, and that should have hit the framing member. That felt like it did. And that is our platform buttoned up. Okay, so that is the end of building and framing these platforms. The lids, I showed you how to cut out the lids and how to frame the platform. It's Friday, which means I have one last task before I get to go home, and that is putting the shop right for the weekend. One of the big tasks that I think is really important for us to do every week is to drain the air compressor of all of its air, and then to drain the air compressor of any fluid that's built up in the bottom of it. And I will now show you what that is and how I do it. So attached to the air compressor over here, I have a string that opens the valve that will let all the air out. The first thing that we want to do, obviously, is going to be with this switch to turn the air compressor off. I don't want the air compressor to continue to fill with air once I start emptying it. So this is going to be loud and noisy, and it always gives me a fright. Okay, so on the air compressor here, there are actually two different places that water can accumulate. I have this regulator, but it is also a filter that siphons the water out of the air line as it goes through the hoses. So we unlock and unscrew this. It'll hiss a little. And I'm going to try to show you, there's a little bit of water in here. So we drained that water out. We can put the siphon back in place, and then we will show you the next place. Okay, this is probably a little bit dark, but here we are underneath the air compressor. All of our air is drained out, so I'm going to open a valve, and this will drain any accumulated water out of the bottom of the tank. You can hear it hissing and the water flowing. This is from about a week of what I would say is average use for our air compressor, and in a second here, when this stops dribbling the water out, I will show you what has accumulated. That's probably good. It's important to remember to close and lock the drain valve there back, or else the next time you go to turn your air compressor on, you will have it continuously charge. So here's the pan, and this is all the water that came out. So not a ton, but considering it was just water that has been squeezed out of the air, it's a good thing we got that out of our air compressor. What I haven't talked about on this episode yet are stud walls. These are the legs that are going to hold these platforms up in the air when we take them over to the performance space. Our stud walls are framed just like a platform is. We make them out of 2x4, and this diagonal helps keep them square and rigid. This is what we've been doing this week. So here are all the stud walls, or a good portion of them. And here we start with platforms, more platforms, more platforms. As always, thank you for watching this episode of Tool Time with Professor Levy. I hope you have found this interesting and educational. It's a little glimpse into how we start operating here in the Scene Shop at Norfolk State University once we're in production mode. The week started out with a giant amount of lumber that we ordered and went to Lowe's to pick up, and now it has turned into scenery. This space that you can see here, where the 2x4 is, where that table is, was a whole rack of 3/4 inch plywood. You can see some more sitting over there on the lumber cart. That is the rest of the platforms that are still remaining to be built, and a couple of other pieces of scenery. The rest have turned into scenery already. These platforms over here, or stud walls, more platforms and stud walls. Again, thank you for watching this episode. I hope you found it insightful.